Hello and welcome back to our podcast. I know it's been a few months. Just so you know, there is a season underway. We have moved to seasons in our podcast episodes, which means hopefully the new season will be out very early in the new year. We decided, meanwhile, though, to do this little episode here. It's a kind of a meet the team. So you're going to say hello to some of the team that we have here. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. You're going to hear about who we are, why we're involved in Queer Disrupt, what do we get from Queer Disrupt, as well as kind of reflecting on the things that we kind of think are important for you, the community who are listening to us. Just a quick content note, this one does have some kind of heavier conversations in it. There's no specific content notes, but I think it does get quite emotional at times, so I just wanted to make you all aware of that. Aside from that, I hope you enjoyed this kind of surprise drop of a podcast out of nowhere. And please let us know what your thoughts are. So I'll leave it there and thank you all so much for bearing with, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Queer Disrupt podcast. Isn't this exciting? I know it's been several months. I know. I'm so sorry. There is several seasons underway behind the scenes, but production is hell and we do what we can. But as I said in one of mine, what is time? Thank you for being patient. Time is linear, or is it? Let's queer time. Woo! So there we are. Today with us I have various members of the Queer Disrupt team, all sat around on Zoom, and they're all laughing heavily at me right now because it is far too early in the morning for this and I sound far too chipper than I normally am. So what we thought we would do here is just do a very quick recording. It's going to be rough and ready, and we all love it rough and ready, I'm sure. That's staying in the podcast editing, I can assure you. So we are here just to have a conversation, just to get you to know us a little bit more. Just as we all drop 1 million followers now, once I actually get to know the faces behind the team, as it were. So I am Nick Cherryman. I am the one who's often being that wonderful, I was going to say dulcet, but more like nasal tones, obnoxiously loud, peaking out your audio on your podcast kind of systems whenever you listen to the Queer Disrupt podcast. And I am joined today by Hannah, Phoenix, Aleks, James, and Andrea, and they will be introducing themselves in a moment, but I am far too invested in kind of hogging the mic for the first few minutes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to give you a very, very, very brief history of Queer Disrupt for those of you who are newer to the group, and then we're going to start talking a little bit about who we all are, why are we here, what do we want, what kind of things do we want to hear from each other. We kind of had a very brief talk, and then I was like, shut up everyone, let's save this for the podcast. So that was fun. So first of all, if this is one of the first podcasts you're listening to, welcome! Yay! You've just found a new little queer community, aren't we? Fabulous. Well, I certainly am. I can't speak for the rest of them. I'm looking at some of them here. Andrea has just rolled out of bed, for example, so it's it's looking like they've been dragged through a hedge backwards. Hannah looks like been dragged through a hedge backwards as well, but that's just Hannah's normal look. We work with what we can, where we can. You can't see the reactions, but I promise you there's laughing. Please don't set HR on me. Anyway, Queer Disrupt started a couple of years ago now, I believe, and I can guarantee Hannah will be jumping in and correcting me if I make a mistake on this one. Hannah and I, Hannah took over the Queer History Warwick reading group, Queer History reading group at Warwick, as convener, and then kind of dragged me on board after meeting through her research, and I ended up being a case study because I'm just that weird for her on some trans inclusive teaching that she was working in. From that, she invited me on to join, and we became Queer History Warwick. Due to the turnover, just because students and people coming and going quite a lot, it ended up with basically everyone else going. And we very, very soon and early on invited on Phoenix, who is on the call today. So Phoenix is actually, aside from Hannah and I, our longest running member at the minute, which is fantastic. They're an undergraduate, but I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit more in depth in a minute. At some point about a year and, I'm going to do some maths in my head, about 4 months ago, We completely relaunched Queer History Warwick as Queer Disrupt due to various reasons that I can't be bothered to go into because they're actually very dull in the grand scheme of things. And from that, we kind of just took off, and we've been building this community since. Hannah and I are still the conveners there. We've still got Phoenix, and we've brought on other members of the team as well. Actually, every member we have today joined at a slightly different time, which is kind of lovely and kind of highlights how over the past year and 4 months we've been kind of expanding continuously. Phoenix early on, James is soon after that. We had Andrea coming on because we realized we needed help and in terms of expanding, and then Aleks came on in our most recent big expansion because we realized that we needed a lot of people to help to help control the reins of the beast that is Queer Disrupt. To quote Bimini Bon Boulash, release the beast. So that's the introduction done. I'm sure I'm going to edit all of that out in a minute, and everyone's going to be like, never want to hear any of that. So maybe it will stay, maybe it won't. So, queer ephemera. How I describe myself, actually. Anyway, I've introduced myself. I am going to pass over to just for quick introductions. So there's something like who you are, what do you do generally in life, existing, and kind of what's your role and place on the kind of Queer Disrupt team. What do you do? How might people know you, as it were, in that sense? So first of all, I'm going to swing over to my partner in crime, Hannah. Over to you.
Hello. Yeah, my name's Hannah Ayres. I am a PhD student at the University of Warwick in sociology, but I also am across sociology and history. And I look very broadly at queer representation in museums. But I always say this, I have done random research in many different areas. So I've also looked at queer pedagogy. I'm looking in the future at queer gaming. We're doing that's one of the podcast seasons, little spoiler for you there. And yeah, that's me.
And your role in Queer Disrupt?
Yeah, convener. That is me. Hello.
Wonderfully experienced team as we are on podcasts. I'm actually going to go through and talk through everyone kind of chronologically. So it'd be really interesting to talk to people. I can see Phoenix like, oh, bugger. Like, I'm next. It'd be really interesting to kind of very quickly hear what the team looked like as you joined and compared to kind of how it is now. And I think it'd be kind of quite nice to hear how people's kind of views have changed as we've gone on. So, Phoenix, over to you.
Hi, I am Phoenix. I am an undergraduate student at Warwick. I study sociology. I finally have something interesting to say about my research interests because I'm finally writing a dissertation because I'm in my third year. So I'm writing my dissertation on how sex education reproduces marginality in sexuality and gender, which I'm really excited for. So that's me kind of outside of Queer Disrupt, and then within Queer Disrupt, I am the social media manager. So you guys will see me around on the social media, and basically most of what goes out on the stories specifically is all me. So you'll have seen me around, I'm sure. But if you don't follow us, then follow us, basically. But yeah, like Nick said earlier, I joined the team very early. And I think when I joined, there were like 5 or 6 people. It was quite a small team. And like my first meeting, we were in the cafe in Warwick, just sat around one small table, which is very funny to think about now when we're in like Zoom calls of like 20 people spread across the whole world. So that's like very interesting to see how like it's definitely grown a lot from my experience. So yeah.
Yeah, we only moved on Zoom to save on the coffee prices as the team expanded. I'm not going to lie. So I think the next person to join our team, if my memory serves and it is spotty at best, is I think James. So James, would you like to kind of just update us? How might people know you? And again, what does it look like now compared to when you joined?
Hey everyone, so my name is James. As Nick said, I'm a PhD student at Warwick. My work focuses on self-inflicted deaths in prison. You may know me because I'm a committee member on Queer Disrupt and I host a lot of events. I've also done some podcasts and some blog posts. So I'm kind of just popping up all around the place essentially. And when I joined Queer Disrupt, it was still actually Queer History Warwick when I joined. And interestingly, something that Nick and Hannah don't know is that I was a bit unsure about the rebrand at the time. And I was super wrong about that. I was super wrong and silly. Yeah.
Fire him. Get rid of him. I don't want him on. Get by.
Oh yeah, so that is me in a nutshell, essentially.
Wow. Wow, that hurt. That hurt. Wow. I'm making notes. No, I'm kidding, of course. It was when we rebranded, it was a big thing, and we did a huge amount of work. And the reason I like to think we're successful, is in no small part because of the work of people like James, just to kind of, all jokes aside there. Next up, we have our resident urchin, Andrea, you're up.
Hello, so I'm Andrea, third year undergrad at University of Warwick. I study history and politics. So my general interest outside of queer disrupt is history, but like queerness in history. I'm as well like through my dissertation kind of doing that. So talking about like queerness in pre-colonial times. And yeah, and then in queer disrupt instead, I do like admin work. So we study our emails, and I just recently did a blog post, but I also like subtitle events. So it's a lot of like organizations kind of stuff. And yeah, that's me. And I mean, I just joined like almost a year ago, not even, but yeah, it's changing a lot queer disrupt, but I'm loving it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrea. Andrea said is on the emails, and if you've got emails, or you have emailed us, you probably heard from Andrea, or perhaps maybe our next person if you've emailed more recently. So I'm going to pass on over to Aleks.
Hello, I'm Aleks, and I am the only non-Warwick based person on this podcast episode, which is controversial. I joined Queer Disrupt quite recently, and I'm helping out Andrea with the admin work, so sending emails, subtitling, all that behind the scenes stuff. And in my everyday life, I'm an MA student of comparative literature at King's College London. And yeah, I just spend my days reading loads of books and sleeping.
Sleeping, did you say? I love it. Like, that is a mood, a proper mood. I love it. I'll do a very quick introduction of me. I am going into my second year PhD student as well. I research drag performance, to be specific and obnoxious about it, kind of post-human and non-human drag. And actually, I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this podcast and how I got there and why I find these sorts of groups and my research so interesting to me personally. But yeah, I do a PhD in women and gender studies, which is now officially what I've changed to from just sociology, which I think means I'm one of about 2 people at Warwick. Just to clarify as well, I think it's a fair point Aleks made there, that Aleks is the only one on this call not based at Warwick. The reason for that is because before the lockdown, I didn't say this in the history, is before the lockdown we used to do events in person, and then we moved online as Queer Disrupt, and we realized actually not only did that open us up to a much bigger audience, it opened us up to a much broader set of expertise that we can bring on board. And as Phoenix said, we've now got a team around the world. We've got people in South Africa, we've got people in India, we've got people in Berlin. I think Aleks is in the glamorous place of London, which is glamorous, but it's not quite international travel here. Rather than like most of us are in Coventry. Woot. So compared to Coventry, London is glamorous. but yeah, we have that expansion now, and we've kind of gone into it. We have people in again Wales and stuff, but yeah, so we have opened ourselves up there. So the very, very, very first question I kind of want to ask us all is, because we are in some ways all here as in some way semi-academic, or at least tied in some way to academia, and based on I guess the conversations that we're having, we have all delved in some way on queer topics. I'm kind of interested in what sort of kind of queer topics, or more broadly topics, do we kind of center ourselves around, I guess? What do we kind of circulate around, and how do we get interested in that? Okay, so I guess to lean in, I think the best person to start with all of this would be the co-convener of the group, because why not? I mean, we're one of the founders of the group. I will talk about my interest in a moment as well. But Hannah, would you like to kind of talk to us about what it is that kind of drew you to these topics and go from there?
So actually, I'm going to start in a different place than I usually start. When I started my undergraduate, I went to the University of Winchester, so a super tiny university. But when I started there, I was learning things. Like I learned a fact about the Black Death. So I was always told like loads and loads of people died, like millions of people died during the Black Death and the plague. And then when I went to this session, they went, actually, we don't know the numbers. It's a bit more flexible. We actually don't know where we're getting these numbers from. And that was the first time that I ever realized that history it's not set. And I also think that's quite worrying, right? That's the first time I realized that history is actually written by somebody, that somebody is directing where that history goes and how that history is told. And I always thought that was really worrying because, yeah, I was at university and that was the first time I was learning that. So I kind of, that was really impactful on me throughout my university life. And I actually really disengaged in my first year of university. Like I really hated it. I didn't want to be there. I was failing. I was failing to put things in and stuff like that. Yeah. So I carried that through with me through my university life, this notion of history not being revealed to us, when essentially like the study of history and how history is done, that's not really revealed to us when we're younger. And I wasn't very engaged in my first year of uni. I really hated it. I failed things. I failed to get things in. And I really wondered why I was like even there, like what was the point? And then I started to really engage from my second year onwards, because thankfully they let me through even with like shit grades and all that kind of stuff. And I realized I actually cared about working with people. That was what really engaged me back in university, right? Like working with people and supporting people and getting involved in lots of mental health things and all of this kind of work. So it was in my second year of uni that I decided I wanted to do my master's, and that I decided I wanted to try and pursue a PhD, even with like bad grades and even not doing very well and being really stressed all the time. So then I got to my master's and I still felt the same way, apart from in my PhD research. So my PhD research then was on how early modern witchcraft was spoken about at an academic level versus how it was spoken about in museums. So I went to Cornwall, Amsterdam, and Salem, Massachusetts to conduct research in museums there. And yeah, I found that really engaging and I really enjoyed it. And I grew a great love for this kind of research. But I realized that and this is no shade to anybody who does witchcraft studies, all more for you, because actually I found it really difficult to say things that had not been said before, and to conduct research in a way that it felt really meaningful for me now. So then I was speaking to my previous supervisor, Simon Sandel, and he spoke to me about molly houses. So molly houses are essentially like bars and pubs that imagine keep like a pub cafe vibe. and they were in the late 1800s in London and other places. We know mostly about them from London, and they were places where homosexual men mostly would go and have sex with each other, party, vibe. It was like a queer community, right? But there was parts of that history that, there was two parts that I really, really enjoyed. There was this drag element, right? This cross-dressing, or whatever you would call it. People have different words for it. This drag element, this gender diverse element, I really latched onto that. But actually what I found in pursuing that topic is I was mostly writing about, like, based on my interpretation, right? There was no fact or evidence, right? I'm doing that in quotation marks. There was no like facts or evidence. And so my supervisor said, you might want to do something that can be based more empirically, that you can start to build a career off of. He said, it's not that you don't talk about this ever again. And I did go on to talk about it, but yeah. So then I moved from that and I decided to do my museum work back in LGBT representation in museum, queer representations in museums. And yeah, that's what I'm doing now. It's really lovely and seeing, it's very complicated. Oh my God, I couldn't have picked a more complicated topic, but it's really enjoyable. And I love meeting everybody and doing this kind of work. And yeah, that's what drew me to queer topics and why I'm invested in Queer Disrupt as a group as well.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm going to swing on to Phoenix now, and I want to hear what their thoughts are on what drew them to kind of queer topics and what they center themselves around.
Yeah, I think I want to speak a little bit about what I mentioned earlier as like my current research interests in terms of like sex education, because one of my like clearest like experiences in secondary school was like one essentially assembly that we had in the school, which was about consent, which was only put in place after there were complaints from other students that consent was not being well practiced by some of the individuals in the school in our year. And that's the only reason why we then had an assembly to talk about consent. And that was essentially one of the extent of sex education that we had in my school. And after this, me and a group of my friends, we all went and we sat out in a field. We were in sixth form, we were allowed to leave whenever. And we sat in a field and we all just sat around talking about how failed we felt by how uneducated we were and how the school wasn't doing anything about that. And we all, as a group of people who were like socialized as women, were really feeling that. And I was struck by the fact that I think I was feeling that even more than the rest of them, because on top of that, I was queer as well. And they didn't have that experience, and I couldn't share that with them as much as I wanted to. And they couldn't relate to me on that, because at least everything that they got matched what worked for them, but it didn't for me. And it was just this feeling of being like doubly failed. That's kind of drawn me to this like queer experience of being underrepresented and how that's so difficult to deal with, and what we need to do to change that and to feel safe to talk about those kinds of things. So that's kind of where I've been like drawn into it from.
Thank you. I think a lot of people can probably kind of unfortunately relate to that in here. So we're going to move on and we're going to talk to James, amusingly our token straight person, which is, we've all got to have one. I know it's awful. We do our best where we can. That is a joke for those who don't know me. Of course, I'm only tolerating him because of the HR. But here you are. Over to you, James.
No problem. So the HR inclusion will now talk about kind of what got me really interested into kind of my topic area. So what happened was, initially, I had a massive argument with my Australian uncle, who's a police officer. And we had a massive argument about punishment, the politics of it, and the police force, and how these should operate. Because of that, I decided to get into these topics a little bit further, because I felt that I had not defended myself very well in this argument. So essentially, my entire PhD can be attributed to a sense of vindictiveness. So what happened was I went really in depth into criminological work, criminological studies, and then I took a queer module because I wanted to push myself into directions I'd never really thought about before. And also my friend did tell me that if I didn't take this, they would never forgive me. So that is also another reason. So I did that, and it was really fascinating because there were some incredible critiques of punishment, of law, and legislation, plus actually hate crime legislation as well, which was also very fascinating to me. Then moving on after this, I noticed that just by engaging with a bit of news, there were quite a few suicides of trans women in prison. There was a brief spate of these in England and Wales. And that is essentially what motivated my entire PhD, because I thought that there must be something fundamentally wrong with the structure of our system of imprisonment if this was happening. So again, this is broadly how I started to get really invested in this topic and develop myself.
Thank you, James. I think that's really important kind of work and kind of histories and stories to kind of be brought out there. Who'd have thought there was a problem with the imprisonment system in the United Kingdom? News to me for sure. So next up, I'm going to ask, I love this, we've got both Andrea and Aleks like desperately neither making eye contact at the minute, which is brilliant. They're both like staring. All of a sudden they're fascinated in the very boring ceilings that they've got. I am going to swing on to Andrea next though. So Aleks, you got the lucky draw this time. Don't expect it next time.
I think like for me it was a very like a recent journey. I feel like growing up, like I always thought queerness meant, who you like. But then I feel like when you grow up, you can understand that queerness is much more than just the social relations, how representation works and everything. And I always loved history, and I always loved like studying it from different perspectives. And I feel like in my second year, I was finally able to actually combine my study, like the idea of queerness within the idea of a historical context, which I think is amazing. And I feel like that's how I came to like kind of keep going with this like perspective of queerness. Now I'm related to it, and why I'm also part of like Queer Disrupt, because I feel like representation and also is very important. It's very important, and it's very also like fundamental for people to see. It is important also to see that we can actually see so many events through a different perspective, and that actually helps us being okay, helps us actually understanding also different other perspectives. It's just not just the queer one. So yeah, this is the reason why.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to jump in next. So my one, I don't know if I've actually told people this before, interestingly, at least not in any depth as to the actual specifics as to why I'm interested. Of course, Andrea on the Zoom call has wandered off at this point. So Andrea is going to miss out on the fun story. It's going to sound a bit like I'm going a bit way off topic, but I promise you it links back around quite nicely. I'm non-binary, I identify as queer. This is all relevant, I promise. But ever since I was about 13, 14, maybe 15, I was very confused about my gender. I didn't really kind of like get it, as it were. And when I was 18 in Freshers at Warwick, I thought for a while I was trans, as in like a trans woman, but that didn't work for me because I didn't feel like a woman. That didn't feel right to me. But at the same time, bearing in mind the language of non-binary didn't exist in any way that we kind of have it now as a kind of in the discourse, in the social kind of conversations, my options were boy or girl. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm a girl. And then I thought, well, that doesn't feel right. So therefore I must be a boy. And it was this kind of very binary understanding of gender. So I kind of got stuck with this and kind of stuck with this kind of general discomfort with kind of my gender moving forward. That always was what I just kind of felt with, and I kind of assumed the discomfort, I guess the gender dysphoria is what we would call it now, that I felt there was just, the queer existence, as it were. I kind of conflated the kind of the kind of discomfort of that with the kind of I get identified at the time as a gay man, because again, I didn't really know any better, as it were. Anyway, my undergraduate study that I kind of went into was English and theatre studies. And a lot of what I looked at there was kind of theatrical form and poetic form, which I kind of love. And performance art is always really interesting to me, because I kind of love this kind of fucking with what we expect and fucking with what is and isn't allowed, and kind of how we do that, and like the structures of the body. So artists such as Marina Abramovich were of particular interest to me, who's quite a famous performance artist, and kind of letting people do what they can with their body. So I kind of graduated, I ran away to France for a year, started thinking more about gendered language in that. Gender was kind of always in my mind, like why do the French gender some things feminine, some things masculine, when English is an example of how that language functions without that. Clumsy reduction, I appreciate, but that was my thinking at the time. So with the encouragement of my then boyfriend, I ended up doing an MA in gender, sexuality and culture at Manchester Uni, and I was taught by some fantastic people such as Professor Laura Doan, who, if you don't know her work, is an incredible professor, some really fantastic stuff there. And I just became more and more kind of uncomfortable with this idea that we were forcing people into these boxes and binaries that didn't suit, which was obviously what I'd already felt earlier on. And I found it kind of deeply dehumanizing. I found it deeply taxonomizing. A lot of Laura Doan's work on kind of Foucault and the kind of taxonomization of the body kind of influenced my thinking here, and how we kind of label and define the body. And the more uncomfortable I felt, the closer I got to going, fuck all of this. I hate this bullshit. This is fucking ridiculous. And at the same time, these kind of conversations around non-binariness, and what non-binary is, and kind of demi-guys and demi-boys was increasing. So I kind of lent into that, and I thought, oh, okay. And when I kind of slotted into that kind of, right, this is, and in the grand scheme of things, this is actually a relatively newer kind of thing. I mean, Hannah knew me as he, him when I first joined Queer Disrupt, so this is a newer thing, but it's been on my mind for years. I kind of really went into it, and it just felt right. And my research is on drag, and part of that is just an interest in drag generally. I mean that in its broadest sense, not just RuPaul drag, which is a very slim, very thin, narrow slice of the pie of drag overall. But I was looking more at drag and how we use that to express ourselves through the form of the body. So we're bringing back form again here, and how and what that means and looks like. And I would become very interested in how do we do things like drag if there's no gender. So what does non-gendered drag look like? Is that a doable thing? And then kind of lurking on like the work of like Judith Butler and things like that, without going too much into it, I started looking at, can we de-gender the body? And what does that mean? Like, if I can use drag as a kind of a case study or a kind of a lens to view how we can gender and de-gender so easily, what does that mean for the conversations that we can have in society that would then prevent me spending over a decade deeply uncomfortable with my gender identity socially? If it meant that someone at 15 years old, like me, could hear these conversations and go, actually, no, this feels right, rather than 10 or 12 years of sitting there feeling deeply uncomfortable with who I am and how I identified and how that works. So that's kind of my story there. Aleks, over to you.
Okay, so by the way, thanks, Nick, for kind of sharing that. It was really meaningful to me as well. So it's kind of helps me to follow that with my own story, which is also quite personal, because what made me interested in trans studies is my own experience as well. And I came out in high school in Poland, and I had a really good experience, surprisingly good experience transitioning socially there, but I had a really bad experience with kind of my medical transition at the clinic I was going to in Poland. not to say that you cannot have a good experience with medical transition in Poland, because I know plenty of people who have. It's just that I didn't get that. That was quite a traumatic experience, and so I wanted to leave, and I got into uni in the UK, and I wanted to kind of begin this new life where I had no intention of telling anyone that I was trans. I was just planning to kind of live my life as a cis straight man, and that was going to be it. And it kind of it was going quite well for me, but then I realized after about 2 years in my undergrad that I was really distancing myself from the trans and queer community here, and I was really missing something, and it was really bad for my mental health because I didn't really have any kind of network of queer and trans people that I could talk to. And then I started reading trans studies and just kind of learning about myself and my community through reading, because I didn't want to go out and talk to anyone, because I felt like I've been living for 2-3 years as stealth and just kind of hiding myself. I just really didn't think I could even like tell anyone that I was trans. And so I started reading, and that's kind of what helped me realize things about myself. And I was reading Susan Stryker, Jack Halberstam, the trans studies reader, and I started reading a little bit about Polish queer history, which there isn't a lot, but I did find a modernist poet who was a trans man in Poland. And I thought that was so revolutionary, so crazy that he kind of transitioned. And so I really wanted to research that as my dissertation. And so because I related to his works on a personal level, and so I started reading the criticism about him in Polish, which was very transphobic at times, and I thought I would have to debunk that using the kind of trans studies groundwork, and then discuss his poetry, which is what I did. And it was like working on my dissertation was a very personal experience, and it was also very, very difficult. Anyway, I completed my dissertation, and towards the end, I was given the opportunity to actually present some of it on I was at UCL then, so I was given the opportunity to present my dissertation during a QUCL event, which was really an amazing experience because I realized there were people who were interested in the things I was doing, and I also shared my dissertation with many of my queer and trans friends back in Poland who absolutely loved it, and I got really good feedback, which, yeah, just sharing my work and the research I've done with other queer and trans people was really what made me want to continue and what kind of makes my life worth living every day.
Wow, this got deeper than I thought. Jeez, just like, let's have a really upbeat, fun time. We're all like, oh my god, these deeply personal stories. I do think we have touched on something here, though, in a really kind of interesting way. Like, all of us have some kind of personal connection to kind of queerness, right, as a topic. Be that in a kind of I don't want to say like an ancillary way, in a kind of alongside way, but even if like we're not necessarily directly identifying with the topics that we're discussing, be that because it's, for example, historically and there's a kind of historical distance there, or perhaps it's kind of slightly kind of alongside what we're doing, and who we identify as, there's always kind of a queer undercurrent or a queer voice of the marginalized that I think is carrying throughout all of the work that we're doing here and all of our interests. And I think it's interesting. I think it's brilliant, to be clear. I think it's interesting, though, that this kind of queer thread has kind of brought us together into something like Queer Disrupt, which I think kind of brings me kind of nicely to my next question. If we could kind of very briefly in this talk about like and I think some of you have kind of semi-answered this, but if we could talk about briefly what makes you gonna want to work for Queer Disrupts, in that sense, because we were having a very quick conversation earlier, and you know, we're all volunteers. Like, we're not doing it for the money, we're not doing it for, you know, fame, frankly. Like, this isn't going to make us world famous or anything like that. So what is it that we kind of have and that keeps us here? So I'll go first. For me, I was kind of invited on. Frankly, I thought it would just be a bit interesting. That was why I joined. I thought it'd be interesting. I wasn't doing an MA at the time. I was just working at Warwick Uni. I'd done my MA, which I'd done part-time whilst working, and I was applying for PhDs at the time. I just wanted to stay in touch with these kind of queer topics. And then the more I got involved and the more that I kind of started working and doing Queer Disrupt, I kind of realized like how important it was and how much I kind of got from it. I found it quite enriching, I guess, for want of the better phrase, quite an enriching kind of experience. So that's kind of what has kept me here. And we get, so for those who don't know, we have a, for the listeners and the team knows this, we have what we call a good vibes page, where we kind of save positive comments that people make about us and feedback, or like if we have a tweet, we save it, and the only people that see it is us. And it's just that little kind of, if we're ever feeling demotivated, we're kind of like, oh yeah, actually we are doing these things and people are getting things from this, and that's kind of important to move forward. We get emails from people who are in countries where they go, there's no kind of space for these kind of queer connections and queer topics and queer communities, and actually Queer Disrupt has kind of given them a space online which is kind of safer for them to engage with, because it's dangerous, frankly, for them to kind of be openly queer wherever they're based. We've always said, I'm not going to say we've been amazing at it, but we've always said we wanted people to be able to access the stuff that we talk about in a way where it's super accessible, and that could be the 16-year-old trans person hiding under their covers at 2 a.m. on their mobile phone because they have nowhere else to go and get hold of these kind of topics and talk about this, and giving that space. So that's kind of what pushes me to keep working with Queer Disrupt. I'm going to move on to Hannah first, because I think Hannah kind of was a kind of a key factor, one of the key drivers in kind of making it what we are now. So I'd kind of be interested to hear what Hannah's thoughts are. And then I think I might kind of go backwards back around the group. So that kind of the reverse order that we just spoke after Hannah. So Hannah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Before it was Queer Disrupt, we were the Queer History Reading Group. And I got involved because I wanted to connect with other queer people, but also center myself in queerness, right? I'm a bio woman who mostly dates men, right? Like, I never felt connected to queerness necessarily in the same way. You know, like I didn't even come out to my parents until my second year of my PhD, right? So well after I'd started discussing these topics. Yeah, well after I'd started getting involved in the Queer History Reading Group and I think we were even Queer Disrupt by this point, right?
I think I remember you talking to me about this a lot on your kind of upbringing.
Yeah, because they kept asking me, why do I care? Why do I care about these topics? And I had to turn around one day and be like, these topics aren't just separate from me. They are me. They involve me. I am surrounded by queerness. I embody queerness, whether I like it or not. And so, yeah, I wanted to connect with people. And then over the last year, like when Queer Disrupt really started to take off, right? Like really started to connect to people around the world. Like there's no way, I'm sorry, there's no way when we started in June last year, there's no way that I thought we would have sold out a conference of 950 people. There's just no way. So I realized actually as we started to do it, and you know, even with the people in this room, right? Like some people also don't have that space to surround themselves with queer people and queer minds. And there's something really beautiful about being able to have a conversation with somebody who is on the same level as you. Like maybe not in knowledge, maybe not in that way, but they're on the same, like they get it because they feel it. You know what I mean? So I think Queer Disrupt is really beautiful in providing these connections and also providing people with the knowledge, the languages, the discussions to be able to speak to their own existence, right? Because I also felt, but I think that's why it took me so long to come out to my parents. I did not know how to speak about my own existence. I always put it to one side and was like, why is it important? It's not important. Like I'll just continue to date men and pretend it's not existing. And you can't really do that. No, it's not. I mean, you can do that if that's what you want to do. I couldn't do it personally. I found it really hard. So yeah, Queer Disrupt, that's what it continues to do for me. Provide, I see, you know what, like what you were saying with the good vibes page, and even just talking when you were talking about, I was looking for that language to be able to express myself, right? It's really truly important, this kind of work we're doing. I really believe that. So yeah, that's me. My thought.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to Aleks next. Aleks, what makes you want to stick with Queer Disrupt? I mean, you've had the chance to flee. All of us have had the chance to flee. For some strange reason, you decided to stick around. So why? Please don't leave. We like you.
Thanks, Nick. Similarly to what you two have said, what's really valuable for me is interacting with people who are interested in the same kind of queer and trans research that I'm interested in. And it's just really valuable for me to see that there are so many people who come to the Queer Disrupt talk, so many people interested in these topics that I want to research, and it makes me realize that what I want to do, it is an option for me to kind of research trans things, and there will be people who will support me and support me in that interest, and there'll be people who want to listen to it, and that it's really valuable for other, especially young queer people to see themselves in history, in the things that they're reading, the media that they interact with, and for us to create that space where we can talk about it is really important.
Thank you for that as well. Andrea, you've been here for just under a year, right? So why have you stuck around, as it were?
So first of all, I also want to say this is so beautiful. I kind of got like a bit emotional, just feel like it's so beautiful why we're all here and what we're doing, and like hearing all these stories. So yeah, I think for me, like why I wanted to stick with Queer Disrupt and also get involved with it is because there is a community of understanding. I feel like what we're doing is beautiful, and I feel like where I'm coming from, like not only people do not like accept queerness or whatever, but even if they do, they don't understand it fully. And I never got to know like a group of people that actually understand you for you actually who you are. It's not that you talk and they're like, what are you talking about? You know, or they're like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. It's like, I feel like there is a deep connection between all of us, and like just our identities and what we went through. And like, even if they're different experiences, I feel like why I want you to stick with Queer Disrupt is because we are understanding each other. And what is more beautiful is also that we are trying to create this safe space for other people. And I feel like it's just very important for me personally to get to know you all and have this, but also for other people. I feel like it's what we're doing is very important for everyone and significant. And I just feel like we're doing generally something very beautiful that helped me personally and like changed me a lot. Like I think since being with Queer Disrupt, I changed a lot of like points of view in different things. But also I feel like it's gonna be even more important for other people.
Thank you. Interestingly, and perhaps a bit provocatively, given the conversations that we've just been having, I'm kind of curious, like James, why are you part of this? Is as a straight person, right? You don't have the kind of community of like-minded queer people, right? That Andrea was just talking about, and a lot of us have spoken about. So, and in no way do I want to kind of portray you as a kind of an outsider to this space. I don't think you are at all. I think you are very welcome in here, and you've been such an integral member of the group. But my question here, I guess, for you is why, and again, please don't take this, why are you here? Like why? There's so many other options, but you chose Queer Disrupt. So Can you just explain a little bit about that?
I think for me, it's heavily influenced by my choice of PhD topic and what it centers around, because regarding the choice of PhD topic, I need a lot of clarification and a lot of challenging of my work by other authors who are also centered on queer topics, like yourself, like Hannah, who can actually improve my work so it is thorough and good at understanding queer experiences and queer lives. And that is a very central part of why I have joined the organization. The other reason why is I get to have some really fascinating and provocative conversations with people who are experts in the field of queer criminology. I want to preview potentially an event that I may have in the pipeline, which is about this. And the reason why I find it so interesting is because queerness is inherently anti-normative, and criminology has a history of normativity and producing bodies that are designed to become the status quo, that are designed to reproduce what is already there, and regulate as much as possible. And it's really interesting that the contrast between criminology's kind of roots in this production of normative bodies and the contrast between queerness is fascinating to me. So yeah, it is partly motivated by all of these massive factors. Also because the people I am talking to are really nice, and I'm getting a really nice community, which I absolutely love.
Cool. Phoenix, yeah, what's your take on this? Why, I know you've already covered this a little bit, but why have you stuck around? You've been here the longest aside from Hannah and I, so clearly there's something tying you to it. Like, you didn't sign your name in blood, did you, with the devil, or did you?
I don't think I did, unless that was wiped from my memory. But I mean, when I joined, it was a lot more of kind of, not to say like a clinical experience, but I was like, oh, well, this will be a nice thing to go on a CV, some nice experience. And also it helped for me that I knew that Hannah's name was attached to it, because I knew Hannah before that, and I trusted like her like involvement in something, and I was like, this is going to be a good thing, whatever it is, like I can trust that it's going to be good. And that's kind of why I joined, and then why I've stayed is just that this is such a community. It's been a community for me personally, and I think we're creating a community, and that's what we're aiming to do within the group, and then like within like the team members of the group, and then for like everyone who's involved in it in terms of like following us and interacting with us in any way, kind of trying to create that community. And just the fact that we can sit here and be so emotionally vulnerable with each other is like absolutely incredible to me. And also last year, when I came out as non-binary, I like went through like a whole thing. I changed my name, I've changed my pronouns, everything like that. And while I was kind of like struggling with getting like validation and everything, and like acknowledgement from other important people in my life, like my family, I came here, or I mean I was already here, but when it was like acknowledged here, there was no question. This got to be the space where I wasn't questioned and I was just accepted. And I really needed that at the time when I wasn't getting it anywhere else. And that's what Queer Disrupt has always been for me, just a place to exist and to not be questioned in who you are, just to be allowed to be. And I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. So far, this has gone on a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I'm quite kind of heavy, kind of deep stuff. So I'm going to kind of lift the mood slightly. I feel like it's been really important and really valuable, and I think a lot of I'm hoping the listeners will kind of understand why we've kind of gone into the depth here that we have. This was originally just meant to be like a really upbeat, fun kind of thing. You heard me at the beginning, like, yay, woo, woo, and now I'm like, oh my god, like snotty mess kind of thing at times. But that's fine. That's fine. I'm just being a drama queen. I'm gonna lift the mood slightly. And I'm gonna ask us to kind of talk about what things are interesting us at the minute. So like, what books, media, films are we engaging with? Is there anything particularly queer about them? Do you choose to read deliberately kind of non-queer things because we're so immersed in other ways? Or do we kind of go, oh, actually, no, I really like this kind of side of things and kind of talking about that? I'm going to start because I just got an email on the future of fashion. Oh, see, I'm immersed in queer culture all the time. Can't escape it. But I'm going to start by talking about books that I'm really enjoying at the minute. Anne Leckie, the Ancillary Justice trilogy, which is Ancillary Justice, Ancillary Sword, and Ancillary Mercy. I might have got the order slightly mixed up there. But there's a kind of wonderful kind of innate kind of queerness throughout that book, which I absolutely love. Without any spoilers, the main character is actually a spaceship, which I know sounds really strange. I promise you it makes sense in the context of the book. But there's something really interesting about the language that they speak. It's obviously translated in quotation marks to English, but the language which they speak doesn't use gendered pronouns at all. So in the translation to English, everyone who speaks this language, which is the main language, it's a big sci-fi kind of epic, always refers to the person as her or she. They always feminize it, which I think is this kind of wonderful flip of how the default in English is masculine. And there's this kind of weirdness where you kind of like, even when you're reading it, you sometimes have those moments where you're like, are they a boy or a girl? And actually, because it is being referred to as her and she throughout. And then every now and again, you'll get another character who's speaking a different language, which does have gendered pronouns. So you might have one character that's been referred to as her all the way throughout by the main character. And then you realize another character goes, oh, he is just doing this. And you're like, that's just throwing everything in my head. And it kind of highlights the fact that actually we don't need these. If we can like build a whole character, then like 800 pages into this kind of 3-book trilogy, we realize actually they're a he and not a she. Well, does it ever matter in the first place what they were? And it kind of highlights this kind of fantastical kind of queerness about talking about bodies. And there's so much about the kind of there's a lot of talk about that, about relationships in the book. And you realize because everyone is referred to as kind of her or she, first of all, there's this kind of weird mix of, there's a lot of sapphic, queer, lesbian relationships going on in the book. But actually, as you kind of realize that everyone's referred to that, you realize that these relationships are based on just their people. And it's the relationships are ceased to be reduced to what bits fit in where and how. That just stops being of interest to the relationships in the book and how that builds. And when there's a kind of romantic connection in any of the characters in the book, you're like, oh yeah, that's just because they like each other, not because this one has a willy and this one doesn't, or whatever. It's kind of quite wonderfully refreshing in a weird way. So that's one book or one trilogy, I guess I would really recommend. I know James is also a big kind of particularly sci-fi fan. That book, that series was actually recommended to me by James. So fantastic kind of recommendation there. But James, what kind of books or films or media? Just pick kind of one, as it were. So I'm forcing you to pick. Sorry, but have a think. Over to you.
I need time. I can't. I'm genuinely not thinking, because the problem is the thing that I have most recently watched is Pacific Rim, and it just keeps on getting into my mind, and I can't get it out of my mind because I literally watched it like, I don't know, last night, and it is the most normative like thing in the it's beautiful.
That's so. I'm going to jump in there. I'm going to have a debate
Yeah.
with you there because I watched that about a month ago for the first time, and I thought it was
Really?
queer as fuck.
Oh, how so?
Because it's about adopting one's body into something else. And the connection that you build in these, so spoilers, the connections that you build with the people who you're in the robots with isn't based on a romantic connection. It's who you're closest to in a kind of bodily, emotional way. It's not a kind of sexual connection. I mean, it's questionable as a film overall in terms of as it were. But like, I think there's kind of some really interesting kind of queer topics that we can talk about. So I'm interested, why do you think it's so normative?
So the reason why I thought it was so normative is because it continuously invokes certain tropes that are very characteristic of these movies, and it continuously does that throughout the entire thing. So you have essentially the old grizzled commander, you have the rogue, no-nonsense action hero who does his own thing. He's very masculine, he's very aggressive, he doesn't play by anyone's rules. And you have this very sort of generic narrative that I felt throughout the whole thing, and potentially that blinded me to the more queer aspects because it was so structured in this formulaic way that I knew exactly what was going to happen at every single moment. And also the fact is that, to me, I think potentially it's informed by my understanding of academia in a sense, which doesn't really, a lot of the time, formal academia doesn't consider massive robots attacking giant aliens as very intellectually stimulating thoughts, or how we engage with these narratives if they are in such an absurd way. But again, this is something that is actually quite significant in academia because it can look down upon those more fantastical productions. Yeah, Nick?
Yeah, this kind of makes me think of kind of Halberstam's work on kind of high art and low art, or high culture and low culture, and what does that look like and stuff. But that feels like, to me, a problem for academia, not for the film. I mean, like I said, the film, I'm not saying the film is amazing. The film is not a bad film, but I wouldn't say, it's going to win any Oscars. You know what I mean? It's not an amazing film. But I think it's really interesting how we can kind of read into kind of these kind of queer, how different people can look at the same film and take different things away from it. One where you go, oh my God, this is so normative. Whereas another person can look at it and go, oh my God, I love how queer bits of this is. And I think that's really interesting. And that's kind of where these discussions come from. Just because I'm aware of time, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm going to open it up to other people. Has anyone else got any kind of recommendations of kind of books or films or anything that they kind of want to talk about? Aleks, go on, over to you.
So I'm quite lucky in that I live a relatively short walk from the amazing Gaze the Word bookshop, which is in London, Bloomsbury. So before I started my comparative literature degree, I used to go there all the time. And now I mostly have to read assigned books, so I don't have much time to visit Gaze the Word and just read what I find there. But one book that came out this year, it's a collection of short stories that I read during the summer. It's called A Natural History of Transition by Callum Angus, and it's a really wonderful book of short stories about trans characters who are in constant transition about their transformations, and there are many irrealist, fantastic horror elements. And I think these short stories really just very beautifully portray the complexity of trans people's identities and their transformations. And so I really enjoyed reading it. Another book that I read this year was Stone Butch Blues by the iconic Leslie Feinberg, and it's available online and pretty much only online as a PDF. because hard copies are very difficult to come by. And so it's the first book that I read entirely on my mobile phone, but mostly in as I was taking a bath, I used to just read it on my phone in the bath. But I really recommend this book. Yeah, it was amazing, really opened my eyes on so many issues and complexities of trans identities.
Amazing. We will shove all the different kind of books and texts, by the way, that we're kind of referencing here in the kind of show notes for everyone. Hannah, you seem interested and ready to jump in, so go on.
Yeah, I had to look over because I keep forgetting the name of the book. So I had to put it next to me. But actually, because of James's podcast, do you know the Putting the Bro Back in Bromance, something like that was looking at the left hand of darkness? I read that book. That was okay. That was fine. But then I started reading. No, it's good. Like, I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't have carried on reading Ursula Le Guin's work if I didn't enjoy it. But The Dispossessed, that's incredible. And I think I'm too dumb to like have a really in-depth conversation of how much I like why I enjoy it so much. No, I'm being serious, because it's like there's so much there in terms of like politics and government and all this kind of stuff that I do not feel prepared to have a conversation about. But actually the thing I found most fascinating that I'm currently dealing with myself is like, who am I as an academic now after 4 years of doing the PhD? What do I want to do, and where am I going, and what is the purpose? And this is like a theme that comes up multiple times of like, what am I doing? Am I stuck? Am I like, have I burnt out yet? Is like that enough? Like, have I finished doing research essentially? Do I have nothing left in me? And I feel that sometimes. I don't think that's the case with me, but I identify a lot with the character, and I can't explain it why, really, but I really enjoy it. I love that book so much.
That's cool, thank you. I haven't read The Dispossessed. I've read the Earthsea series, which is kind of lovely. And there's a lot of really interesting discussions there about kind of gender and sexism and who has access to what and why and how, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so we've been talking for a bit, and I'm going to kind of ask one final question of everyone, which I think is going to be great, because then we'll wrap up. Lest we talk for hours and hours and hours and hours, which I think we could. So the question I have here is based on a conversation that we had briefly about what does this kind of mundane queerness look like? And I don't mean mundane as in boring, I mean mundane as in the everyday. So what kind of experiences of kind of mundane queer joy do we find around the place and in our lives, and how can we find that kind of queerness and queer joy in our life? I'll go with mine first. I ended up catching up with a friend the other day, a couple of days ago. Just went for to the bar on campus, where I actually ended up bumping into Andrea of all people, because Andrea works there. And that day I was feeling a little bit femme, and I was dressed in mask clothes but with high heels. So I was basically Nick but taller, and it's the gist of it, and with a bit of a strut. So we ended up going to the pub on campus, me and my friend who isn't part of Queer Disrupt, and karaoke was there, and I ended up, because he was feeling down, doing some karaoke. And it was really interesting there that I ended up really channeling a kind of my drag performer side. My drag name is IB Profane. And I kind of ended up really channeling that, but as Nick. And hilariously, the first song I did, just because I'd literally just done it, so I knew it quite well, was Sweet Transvestite from Rocky Horror Show. So I got up there and I'm singing around, I'm having a great time. I was doing my proper drag stuff where I was working the crowd and everyone had an amazing time. Finished that, my friend was like, that was amazing, you need to do another one. And I really didn't want to. I was just not in the mood. Not that I wasn't in the mood, I just thought, oh, I'm knackered, I don't want to. I want to just sit and relax. And I looked at the kind of time frame, because the way to do it gave me a rough time of when I'd next be up if I put one on. So thought, you know what, yeah, I'll put another one on in the knowledge that it was going to take about an hour to get there. There was something like 17 singers in front of me or something. And I'm like, I'm going in about 40 minutes. So I thought I'll be gone and, you know, they can call it up. So I put on Sissy That Walk by RuPaul. And one of the hosts, after a couple of songs, came up to me, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God I won't have to do this. Came up to me and just said, I'm so excited to see you perform again. We've bumped your song up. So I went from, at this point, 14th in the queue to 4th in the queue. But I think there's something really fun there about this kind of queer joy that people had just by kind of someone in heels on stage just throwing themselves into a song, because I was channeling this kind of the drag side of me. And there's a couple of videos that I posted online that host filmed. The host filmed it and followed me on Instagram entirely to send me the videos, and you can just hear them singing along to everything I'm saying. And I get off the stage and Sissy That Walk to do the walk, because it's got a famous bit where you kind of do the walk in the song, and you just hear them go, yes! And I was like, wow. And there were some people in the audience who were singing along with every single word. And it was kind of brilliant to see this one table really going for it. And then next to them, this was, I'm perhaps stereotyping, there was, if I was stereotyping, these 5 kind of very straight kind of football jock type kind of, just looking like they couldn't have been less interested in it. And there's a bit in the song where it goes, whoa, whoa. And I was getting the audience to sing that bit, and they just weren't engaging. And I remember just standing on stage and going, oi, you. And pointing and forcing them to engage in this kind of queer song. And they did. They kind of did it, and they laughed and they got involved. And I just thought, like, there's something kind of wonderful and marvelous about queerness and queer culture, and being able to kind of express that and actually bringing people in. And that was a completely unexpected thing. We hadn't planned on doing karaoke, but I ended up having an amazing night. My friend had never seen me perform. He's a newer friend. He joined this year on campus. I know him through a completely unrelated club. I do scuba diving. And he was like, what was going on there? I absolutely loved it. So yeah, that's kind of my example of kind of mundane, in quotation marks, queer joy. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so what are other people's hands up on the Zoom call? We have I know Hannah, over to you. What's kind of your kind of experience of kind of, not necessarily queer joy, but mundane queer positivity, I guess?
Yeah, so there's loads of people I've met that are just like, I've met online, right? Like Aleks is one of them. I've never met you in person, Aleks. I've only ever met you online, right? And there's people in Queer Disrupt, other people that I've never met. But somebody reached out and said, I'm doing an exhibition on comfort. It's in London. It's on this day. Do you want to come and have a look? And I said, you know what? Actually, it's reading week currently. In sociology at the University of Warwick, so I'm not teaching this week. And I was like, you know what? I will go to London. I will. I will go look at this exhibition. And it was in the bottom of this church that they'd completely redone it, and they've been building it back up, and it's in the middle of this community. So they're creating this community space again. And and it was in the bottom of this church, and they reused materials from like other exhibitions that they had to put. They had like very little money to pull everything together, and it was so stunningly beautiful, in a way that I think like it captured me in a way that I think sometimes when I go into like more mainstream museums, I just don't feel it. And they were showing me and my partner around, they were showing us around and talking about all the pieces, and half the pieces were pieces from their own collection that they brought in and they wanted people to see. And then they ended on this like one piece that they have no idea where it's come from. There's no label, there's no nothing, but it came from their grandparents' house. So it's this like acrylic painting, very beautifully done, of like countryside. And I was like, isn't it so nice when there's just stuff in your house, or stuff in your parents' house, or stuff in homes that you've been in, and you're like, I don't know where this comes from, but it brings me a sense of home, it brings me a sense of joy. And I think it really just captured that in a really beautiful way. And also the conversations that we had were really amazing, you know, having never met in person and only ever met online. And also I was speaking to you about this, Nick. I don't know why the height thing always throws me off. I never know how tall people are sitting here and like looking at you all. So I always get thrown off, especially because like I'm a little bit smaller. So yeah, no.
Yeah, in my mind, if I ever meet Aleks, I don't know if I'm gonna get, because I've not met Aleks either. Aleks is either going to be about 4'3" or like 8'2", and there's nowhere in between. So I'm really looking forward to kind of. I don't even want to know Aleks. Don't even tell me how tall you are. In my mind, I just love this idea that like you're like something from the Wizard of Oz. You know, you're either a Munchkin or like an Ent or something from Lord of the Rings, and that's it. So yeah, okay. Aleks, do you wanna, speaking of our friendly giant Aleks, what have you got, any examples of kind of queer mundanity?
Yeah, I wouldn't even be able to tell you how tall I am in feet. So those numbers you just said mean absolutely nothing to me, and so good. You'll never find out. Yeah, so I can mention the story. As I was telling you before we started recording the podcast, I recently started swimming again after about 7 or 8 years of having not having been to a swimming pool. And that is because earlier this year I finally got tattoos over my top surgery scars that really kind of they just helped me with my dysphoria, and so I was finally able to go swimming, and now I do it every other day, and it's just my favorite thing to do these days. Is just my new sport, and I love being in the water, and it's just such a freeing experience. And yeah, I'm just completely in my own world, and it's the best thing ever.
I'm just curious, what are the tattoos? Do you mind sharing, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can't show them to you on the podcast, but they're quite interesting. So they're both based on, I kind of designed them myself, but they're both based on artworks, one by a Polish modernist artist named Zofia Stryjeńska. It's a drawing of a Slavic god and his wolf, and the other one is it's a drawing of of Virgin Mary actually feeding Jesus, but yeah, I'm a weirdo. But the baby Jesus is a loaf of bread. So it's kind of just on that whole transformation.
This is incredible. I love it. I absolutely love this. Like, how have you only just mentioned that to us? Like, now these sound fantastic. Out of curiosity, if you're ever happy to share pictures to
I can show them to you right now. It's just
do it.
Also, this is the first one, kind of the gold. It's more of this shaded. I like it. Yeah, and then the other ones here, it's pretty big.
That is the Virgin Mary feeding a loaf of bread. I was going to kind of describe them, but I think you can't see the reactions of the group for everyone on the podcast, but Phoenix's mouth is just hanging open. Andrea is just like dying with laughter. James looks a bit confused, but I think that's James's general demeanor. And Hannah is just pissing herself laughing as well. They're incredible tattoos. I absolutely love them. I won't in every way ask you to share pictures of it online, but you are welcome to. I think that would be really funny, but like if you don't, that's fine. We'll just edit this bit out. They're fantastic.
I'd be happy to share them someday. And even now when I'm at the swimming pool, even when I get, just because of my brain, I get stressed out that someone's gonna clock me and keep staring at my scars. When they're looking at my chest, I know they're probably looking at my crazy tattoos. And they're just thinking, what is this guy doing, walking around with this Virgin Mary hugging a loaf of bread?
I have that as well. I have a very large hummingbird tattoo, watercolor hummingbird and floral tattoo on my upper thigh. And I, like, for people who have tattoos, you often forget you've got tattoos. I know that sounds really weird. You just forget, and then you'll catch yourself in the mirror and you're like, what's that? And for a while I was like, why do people keep staring at my crotch? And they weren't, they were just looking at my upper thigh. And I thought I was the sexiest thing on the planet for a while at the swimming pool, because I go swimming as well. And it turns out, no, they were just drawn to the colourful tattoo I've got. Phoenix, James, Andrea, have you got any kind of connections? And Phoenix, over to you.
First off, more connections. I literally, over the weekend just gone, I just got a tattoo like on my chest between my boobs, and I was out the other night and I was like wearing like an open shirt, so it was like visible, and like whenever people were looking at my chest I was like, don't look at me, and then I was like, oh, that makes sense. So same vibes. My experience of queer joy recently, the other night I was out with my best friends, and we realized we've been best friends for like 2 years now, and we've lived together for over 2 years. We've lived together for over 2 years, and we realized that the three of us have never been out, just the three of us all together. We've either been out like with other people, or like it just in pairs. Like we've never been out the three of us all together, like us best friends. And it was just so fun to be out together. We went and we listened to some jazz, and we were drinking cocktails. It was really crazy. And then we came home and we dragged the chairs from our kitchen outside, and we sat outside. We live on like a little like cul-de-sac, and we sat outside. It was like drizzling, and we were sat outside in the rain, just like slowly sobering up and talking about absolutely nothing. Just like middle of the night, 1 a.m. conversations. And it was just like so beautiful to just have that time of like a really like deep friendship, this connection that the three of us all have together. And like as a group of three queer people who haven't had as many experiences with other queer people, being able to like have those kind of open friendships where we can just relate to each other. It was like just a really like wholesome, really fun moment. So that's mine.
You're queer? What? I'm kidding. That sounds really. I get that kind of. There's those connections that you can build. It's just fabulous. James or Andrea, have you got anything? Let's do Andrea, because Andrea just muted, and then we'll swing to James.
Yeah, I mean, kind of connected to Phoenix points, like about meeting like queer people, thing that in work had never really done until this year. But yeah, this is actually about like Hannah. So me and Hannah, like she was like in my like she was like in my class last year. Of course, she was my seminar tutor. But then we never met like outside of like kind of academics or like, and then we are in this group, and so like we always see each other online. And I was like, oh, wanna like grab a coffee sometimes. And we grabbed the coffee, and it was just so nice that we know, like, we knew each other somehow in different ways, but like we just has this bond, and like we talked for like kind of like, I think, yeah, 2 hours or even more. Like we talked for so long, and it was just so nice just talking about queer topics and just talking about like personal experiences and like things that we find like weird or funny, and it was just so beautiful. And I feel like we both love to talk. So like we're just talking and talking and talking and talking, and like honestly, like it was beautiful. The reason why I also like wanted to try to make a kind of a tradition, like every week a coffee. We can't make it like because we're both very busy, but it's just beautiful. And I know it's just fun to see people that like, you know, they're like they understand you, love to talk to you about like things, like weird things as well, that sometimes maybe people wouldn't even understand. And we're just beautiful also because, again, like because of COVID and whatever, and because of how work is, like I've never met like queer people, and meeting them like in person was just like, oh wow, this is actually so fun. This is something I've been missing out for like 2 years now. So yeah, and I also love Anna, so it's so good.
The biggest question is, was Hannah taller or shorter than you expected? I mean, I'm teasing, of course. And I think that brings us to James. James, over to you.
Yeah, so there's this thing that I do now that I haven't actually told anyone about, but it's ever since I joined Queer Disrupt, which is that because my parents are children's book publicists, I go to Waterstones and outlets like this, and I go to the children's book section, and I always look for their books essentially. But now what I've developed doing essentially is every now and then looking for queer books essentially, and looking through them and browsing them. And books like And Tango Makes Three is one of my favorite. It's about two adorable penguins. And again, these sorts of little moments I've absolutely loved doing, and I continue to do it because it just makes my heart warm a little bit.
That's amazing. And Tango Makes Three is a brilliant book. I do, as I'd be profane, I did at Christmas last year, kind of drag queen story time, and that was one of the books I did. I will come to you for kind of recommendations on kind of queer kids books, because I try and do kind of explicitly inclusive books where I can, because there's only so many white blonde men rescuing princesses guarded in castles with dragons that I can take before I've just had enough. Okay, I think that kind of brings us towards the end of our podcast. This kind of got much more kind of personal, and that's not a problem. I think it's brilliant, than I think any of us were kind of really expecting. I think it was really lovely just to kind of get all of us in a room and chatting. I mean, this is only about a third of the Queer Disrupt team. It's just a third that could make it at this time as we were recording, because we are so big now. And I kind of hope that people listening, I've kind of got like a glimpse of the community that we try and build, right? As Queer Disrupt, and if this is only a third, like there's so many other connections and things that we talk about and want to, and kind of open up the space for with other members of the team, and kind of the spaces that we're trying to make for you as the listeners and our audiences and our conferences and events to kind of network and talk to, and kind of create your own spaces, be that alongside us or separate to us. I think we're not precious about that. You know, please take the kind of things that you have here and kind of build those fantastic moments of connection. I think I'll wrap up there entirely. Yes, thank you everyone who's stuck. I mean, it's probably been stuck with this. It's been a longer episode, I'm sure, even edited down. Thank you very much, and that's goodbye from me, and
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Queer Disrupt podcast. Do you want to hear more? Well, check out our Podbean, where we host all of our podcasts, but you should be able to find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you normally find your podcasts. But please let us know if we're not where you usually get yours. and rate and subscribe to us. It really helps us genuinely. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. So follow us there to stay up to date on all of our events and catch up on when we release our tickets for upcoming events. All of our events have limited numbers, so make sure you subscribe to be the first in for a chance. Our website is queerdisrupt.com, so check us out there. And finally, all of the work is produced by us for free, but making these events and podcasts are expensive. We rely on the generosity of you, our amazing audience, to keep us going and producing everything we do for free. Pop onto queerdisrupt.com and click on the donate button. Every penny you give goes straight back into producing more content for you to listen and watch to for free. Thank you and catch you next time.